Welcome.
Not yet.
Well,
Straight.
termina, no?
I already okay, okay, already.
Okay. Welcome to this live streaming. Welcome to my YouTube channel, Carlo Viminzi. And this channel, I repeat, I think that everybody already knows, but nevertheless, this channel is devoted to classical music. Music performed mainly by myself and my collaborators, but also from friends. And this is what I'm doing to promote classical music to also to people who are not used to listen to this music, which is, according to me, quite important for education, for everything. So I invite my friends who are attending to promote this channel to their friends and to invite them to join us and to subscribe the channel. We are already many, but nevertheless, the more we are, the better it is. We need to promote classical music, especially in this dark age, and therefore I invite everybody of you to join us for this thing. Therefore, now the official starting is at 3 o'clock now. It's 2:40 some, but we have started a little earlier to allow people to join us. So it's at 3 we'll start talking about the topic, the subject of this live streaming. Day before yesterday, January 27th, was Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart's birthday. Mozart has been one of the greatest composer of Western music, Western classical music, and was has written a lot of very important music, and especially for a pianist as I am. So we talk about one of the top composers, and I like to talk about him since this composer uh, occupied a lot of time in my life. Many books behind me are his music, and I have also recorded some music of his, and you can find some also on my YouTube channel, so you can try to see what we have. And both in solo music, two piano concertos are available on the YouTube channel, and not only that, also the two piano quartets, uh, and we expect to have more in the future. What else? So please join us again. Join us to our. We are. I see that people are joining, and therefore we expect you to be more and more. And we will talk about, as I said, we talk about Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart this afternoon for Italy, for the Philippine friends who are joining us. It's already night. It's almost 10 o'clock p.m. And I greet the Filipino friends who are joining us, and hope you will be many by the end of this live streaming. And I would like you to join us, to subscribe the channel, to make your friends subscribe this channel, which is one of the few devoted to spreading the word, sorry, the word of classical music, and hope will be as many as possible, many more and more and more. So once again, welcome to this channel, and as I said, this is devoted to classical music, and would like to talk about music and musicians, and in the future streamings, I'll talk about topics, musicians, performers. We'll talk about my friends, my teachers, about composers, about what I'm doing and what I'd like to do in the future. Thank you for joining us, Paniska. Hello. You will forgive me for using glasses to read, but I'm getting older and I need the glasses to read. And so this is life. Better to have glasses, but being blind. What else? I'd like to thank all supporters and people who attended my live concerts and hope to be able to see you on stage too. The experience of a live concert is always the best, better than streamings, better than recordings. And of course, in my life, I recorded recorded many CDs, and therefore I am happy. Welcome in the Camillas. 5 million viewers. I'd like to. Okay, welcome to this live streaming, and repeat, we are to this afternoon or night. We are talking about Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, who is one of the composers. I will anticipate what we are talking. Mozart was a great composer, very controversial figure, by the way, because his biography has been hi Verna Salva saying.
Hi, Mom Berna Salva. Thank you for coming.
Verna Salva, thank you for coming, for joining us in this to this live streaming. I'm sure that you won't regret to be here, since we are talking about a very important and in the meantime controversial figure of. We will talk. Oh, welcome, Janina San Martino.
Welcome, Janina. Shout out.
And thank you for coming. Thank you for coming, everybody. We are going to talk about Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart this afternoon or tonight. We're talking about this very important, and we will talk about some publication of some recent books written, very controversial books written by two Italian musicologists, Luca Bianchini and Anna Trombetta, who wrote a certain number of books about Mozart and his figure, which becomes controversial. And those books started a very big fight inside Italy. Some of them are already translated into English and are available on the market, mainly Amazon, but also.
Love books. Love books.
Too bad, Verna Salva, you don't like. Welcome, Evangeline Rituya. Welcome to the.
So much. Thank you so much sa ating walang tulugan.
So we thank you for joining us. To this. It's now for 14:47. In 13 minutes, we will start going into the topic. We started a little earlier to make sure to be able to set everything up and to be able to have everybody ready for what I love reading to practice my pronunciation. In which language, Verna Salva? I hope you don't want to learn Italian, which is a very difficult language and very complicated, even in case more complicated than English. I have started this channel, and all the live streaming will be in English, even if I live in Italy, just to make sure that everybody can understand what I'm saying. And thank you, Lavi Po. English language, okay, but well, actually, my English is not exactly the best, but I studied in the States, so my accent is very American, somewhat New Yorkian, even if I studied in Philadelphia. I have studied in the States and taught and played concerts all over the United States of America, and also in Mexico and Argentina, which are not English-speaking countries, of course. And but I had occasion to talk about to teach, and so I have a reasonable command over the language. Let me see. Yeah, yes, Italian is a bit hard. It's really hard. Trust me. It's a language that Italian people don't know well either. And anyway, we are starting being many, and I am happy to have people here. People who want to talk about serious music. It's now 10 minutes to 3. In 10 minutes from now, we will talk about Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, one of the most important figures in Western music, a man who created the style after a very difficult beginning, as we will see. Actually, Mozart had a very twisted life, and we'll talk about it soon. And this is very important. Thank you, Akavi TV, for joining us. We have so many viewers now. We are starting.
Shout out everybody, 8 million viewers.
I would like to.
You want to listen about Beethoven? He was talking about Beethoven.
No, I'm talking about Mozart.
Mozart, excuse me.
Welcome, Payong Kabigan.
Payong Kabigan, thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us to this live streaming. Repeat once again at 3 o'clock Italian time, 9 minutes from now, we'll start talking about Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart.
Classic music.
This channel is devoted, please, of course, subscribe and listen to good music. Subscribe and ask people to subscribe to this channel, which is devoted to classical music, performed mainly by myself, but also by my collaborators and friends of mine. We will talk about many people. We'll talk about my collaborators, my friends, and also soon we'll talk about my teachers, just to explain people where I come from and why I am doing this. I had very important teachers in my life. I was trained in Moscow at the Moscow Conservatory of Music with one of the top teachers, Vladimir Natanson. And later I studied with Paul Baumgartner, who was another very important pianist and teacher. And later in Philadelphia with Mieczysław Warszawski, who was a student of Beethoven. So
You are, my love, you representative yourself because some of them they don't know.
Yeah, okay. I am advised to introduce myself. My name is Carlo Levi Minzi. I am a pianist born in Italy, but educated in the German tradition. I graduated at the Milan Conservatory. I was born in Milano, Italy, northern Italy, and graduated at the Milan Conservatory of Music. But I must tell you, and I will repeat later, the education here in Italy was very provincial. So I, thanks to good marks, I won a scholarship to the Moscow Conservatory where I had to start from scratch, more or less, and studied 2 years with Vladimir Natanson and resumed a certain standard. Later, I studied with Paul Baumgartner, who was teacher of many important pianists like Karl Engel, Alfred Brendel, and later again in the United States in Philadelphia with Mieczysław Orszowski, who was a student of Leschetizky, who was a student of Czerny, who was a student of Beethoven. So I am, in a certain extent, a Beethoven fifth generation. Also sixth because Baumgartner himself was a student of the same Leschetizky, who was a student of Czerny, who was a student of Beethoven's. So I have a certain kind of background. After that, returned to Italy, where I taught at the Milan Conservatory of Music. And I left my teaching job because I was disgusted by the situation there. I decided to go away, and now I devote myself to full-time concert activity, trying to resume this life after once the pandemic is over. What else? Who else? Verna Salva. Okay, thank you for saying wow, but it's nothing particular. Everybody could have done this, but just a few do. What shall I say? It's already 5 minutes to 3. In 5 minutes, we start talking about today's subject, which is going to be the life of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, who was born on January 27th, 1756. So we are celebrating Mozart upon his birthday anniversary. Of course, Mozart is long time dead. He died young in 1791, just a few days before turning 36. We'll talk about his life and a very controversial life. And we'll talk about publication, about him and about his music. So we just once again, I thank you all people here, all friends who are joining us, and I'd like to thank you for joining us to this, and don't forget to subscribe and to make your friends subscribe to this channel.
Thank you for thumbs up.
And of course, thank you for thumbs upping and for being with us. What else? Now we have 3 more minutes to go before starting, and I would like to once again to thank you. Join us. This channel, as I repeatedly said, is devoted to classical music and to to the music performed by myself and my collaborators and my friends. And we have already some 80 videos, available videos. Some are still to be released, and we will make more. I am working on this channel since we cannot go around very much because of a pandemic, many concerts were cancelled because of restrictions, and so we are waiting to resume normal life. But in the meantime, we are starting talking about things and about music, about classical music, which is neglected in education in Italy and also in the Philippines, in spite of the very good Conservatory of Music you have in Manila. There is the San Mateo Conservatory. I could test in occasion of a master class. I could test their students who are very good, better than Italian actually. We are almost ready to start, and we talk about Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart to this afternoon, tonight. We talk about Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, Austrian composer actually. Salzburg at the time was not Austria, but later he moved to Vienna and lived there most of his life. And what else? Who is coming now? Thank you, Payong Kabigan. The goodness of classical music. I hope so. You say, I hope your our young generation would inherit the goodness of classical music. I would like to. I have taught for years at the Milan Conservatory, trying to help people not only inherit just the love for classical music, but inherit a tradition I had received from my teachers and from some collaborators. I was so lucky I could play with one of the top musicians of the previous generation. I had a 15 years collaboration with violinist Norbert Breinin, who was the principal of the Amadeus Quartet, mainly one of the most important string quartet around in 20th century, and he the quartet was one of the top quartets. When the ensemble disbanded due to the premature death of a viola player, I started a collaboration with him as a soloist, and as a duo we played all over Europe and the States, and recorded one CD featuring the complete Brahms work. So I have learned not only from my teachers, but also the German tradition was part of my life, thanks to this collaboration. It's now 3:01. Now we start talking about Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. As I said, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, we are celebrating his birthday, which occurred 2 days ago, January 27th. He was born on that date in 1756 in Salzburg. Salzburg was not Austria at the time, but was part of the empire, and was linked to Bavaria. In any event, Mozart was born there, and his father, Leopold, was a musician too, and was a violinist and a composer, and was working for the Archbishop of Salzburg, who was also the Count of Colorado. And at the time, most people who were so rich could afford to have a small orchestra, smaller or bigger depending on the money. So they had their own music at home, and Leopold was working for him. Young Wolfgang showed a talent, a big talent. The father, who was not doing very well, was economically poor and had problems, realized that he take could take some advantage out of it and he was also aware that yeah, his son's life would have been quite problematic. So, on one side, for his own sake, and on the other, for his son's one, tried to push him in a career as a child prodigy. So the kid at age 5, 6, together with his older sister, who was talented too, were pushed to a concert career and taken around as child prodigies to hopefully to become famous early at an early stage to be able to survive. This, on one side, helped him, but spoiled his education, which was uneven. And this is a story which is very well uh, described in the books of two musicologists, Italian musicologists, Luca Bianchini and Anna Trombetta. They published numerous books on Mozart, and the first of which has been translated into English, so is available on the market. Amazon mainly, but can be easily ordered. The story is that sorry, the young boy was attributed a lot of music, which most likely he either did write or was helped to write or copied. So there are many. He was supposed to have composed music very, very young, which is partially true and partially not. There is a very big problematic here, and of course, since his career was built by his father first, and then we'll see how many people did it, collaborated on this issue. And in any event, the young kid was really talented, but had serious problems from the very beginning, because father, thanks to sponsors, brought him around. At age 8, Mozart was in London, and later in Italy. The reason of his trips was, of course, to make him known around the world, around the musical world. But on the other side, this was quite useful for him because he could learn what he had not studied. He learned on the battlefield, so to speak. So in London, he met Johann Christian Bach, one of Johann Sebastian's sons, was working there. So he had occasion to listen to music, to learn something from him. The father took him to Italy twice, so he could meet people there and learn the Italian opera, which was the main reason why the father was taking him there, because the opera was the big market where the big money was placed, was and actually is, still is. Uh, the idea of Leopold was to make him become a German composer of Italian operas. So to find a niche for him. In any event, he took him to Italy twice, and many tales, many fairy tales are written about this trip. In any event, he was in Milano. He was in Rovereto, where a Mozart society is still active. Verona, then Milano, and then south Florence and Rome. In Rome, he was supposed to have copied by memory a piece by a composer named Allegri, which was property of the Pope Chapel, the Pope cantors. And so many things were said. In Bologna, he met Father Martini, who was a monk and was a famous music teacher. He was supposed to have studied there, and he gave an exam to be admitted to the academy as an academic. He passed the exam, but it seems, according to Luca Bianchini and Anna Trombetta, that Father Martini helped him to write his essay on his composition, so he could otherwise, according to them, he would have never made it. In any event, he was admitted to the academy. He became academic in Bologna, which was an important achievement. And finally went back to. In Milano, he had a small opera performed by name Lucio Silla, and this was happening in the 1770. In an event, they came back to Salzburg also because the father had to go back to work, and he was having a very bad time. Also, the younger Mozart Wolfgang was hired, but he was soon kicked out because of his behavior, which was not exactly the most refined one. And this is another story, very famous. There is a movie by a Hungarian director by name Amadeus, where his behaviors are very well shown. Well, the movie is exaggerating a lot, but he used to behave in a very strange way. So at a certain point, he was fired and had to go on his own. So he started going around. We find him around, and finally he went to Paris. This time he was accompanied by his mother, who unfortunately died there. He was not very lucky in Paris. He tried to find his own way, but was not very lucky and didn't find a way to work very much. Even if he wrote some good music, At the time, Mozart was not the Mozart we are talking about, of course, and this is normal. The reason why he had the problems was because his education was poor, so he had to grow up alone, basically alone. He traveled to Mannheim so he went back from he came back to Austria from Paris, uh, traveled a bit, and finally decided to go to Vienna to try make to make to make a career there. He was trying to write operas there. As I said, his career, the big careers were made in the opera. The big money was in the theaters, was in opera. So so he tried to enter this field, but the problem he had was that at the time the big there was a sort of Italian mafia, of course. They were writing Italian operas, and so Italians were supposed to be the best. The Kapellmeister, in other words, who was the person who was running the business for the emperor in Vienna, was an Italian man by name Antonio Salieri. Antonio Salieri was born in Legnago, so close to Verona, in 1750, and he was was trained in Italy, moved to Vienna, and became soon the favorite of the emperor, who appointed him as I call Kapellmeister, the master the of the chapel of the court orchestra. So he became basically the boss in Italy, and of course invited other Italian musicians like Adolfo Sarti, just to mention one, who had a career before moving to Russia. So everybody was Italian, and you can easily imagine how difficult was uh, his life there. He couldn't make it. He had problems in finding his way out. So since there was no way to have opera commissions for operas, he suddenly found his way out in another way. What happened is that Mozart has learned how life was difficult from his father. And so he decided to become an entrepreneur himself. So he created his own concert activity. Basically, he launched subscriptions concerts featuring his own music performed by himself and friends. In other words, the man was hiring the people for performing orchestra, right? Of course, writing his music, mainly piano concerto, symphonies, arias, and everything. So he was playing a certain number of concerts every year. He was renting his own the hall, was everything. He was paying for everything, and thanks to subscribers and sponsors, the subscribers was getting not only the entrance to the to the concerts, but also the scores of the music which were performed. How could this be? Very simple. He was working exactly like the others. He had assistants who were his students, who were copying for him, handwriting his music and the parts, and so he could supply all the scores. He could easily make the orchestral parts, and this was the way he was teaching to his students. It was so they were learning as he did. They were learning, so to speak, on the battlefield, so to speak. So he started this career, which lasted many years, and he started to be a freelance, the first freelance in history. Later, this was the life of most of the big concert players. In Beethoven himself did exactly the same thing, and Mozart, both father and son, were affiliated, and they were the first sponsors. They were affiliated to a sect which included very important people like Goethe, the writer, Johann Simon Mayer, and other. A sect called the Bavarian Illuminati, Illuminati di Baviera. Those people, this sect was founded by a man by name Adam Weishaupt, and was a sort of proto-revolutionary Republican sect. Were trying to establish a republic, to get rid of emperors, kings, and nobility. Most people most likely had sponsored young Mozart, and one of those, and they had also infiltrated the Freemasonry, the Masonic lodge in Vienna. So Mozart was brought into this in this lodge in Vienna, where he made numerous acquaintances. And this was the turning point for his career. He was already relatively famous because his subscription concerts were going relatively well, and brought him money, and as well as students, which were of course paying for being taught. At the time, there was no real public school of music. So the most important acquaintance he made was a nobleman, a Dutch nobleman by name Gottfried van Swieten, who was a Dutch diplomat who was working for the Austrian emperor, and eventually became the chief librarian in the library, in the Vienna library. This man was a very cultivated person, loved music, and he was also organizing his own concerts. Every Sunday at 12 noon, he had private concerts. He held private concerts with his own musicians, and featuring mostly Johann Sebastian Bach, who at the time was practically unknown. Now we look at Bach as one of the most important composer of all the times. But at the time, in that particular time in Vienna, he was practically unknown. Johann Sebastian Bach will be rediscovered once for all by Felix Mendelssohn later. Speaking of Mendelssohn, 1 second, just to open a small parenthesis. The story of Mendelssohn is quite, it's parallel to Mozart. He was born in 1809, and he also had a sister, very talented musician, and so they both started early taking music lessons. But the difference between Mozart and Mendelssohn, which explains how Mendelssohn developed early in a different way from Mozart, was that Mendelssohn's father was a very rich banker, so he could supply the best education, the best teachers. When Abraham Mendelssohn found out that the best piano teacher he could find was in Paris, and this lady was Marie Bigot, who was a French pianist who was praised by Beethoven and was the first performer of his piano sonata opus 57, better known as Appassionata. He moved the whole family to Paris to allow the kids to get lessons from her. So you can imagine that Mendelssohn was able, both the Mendelssohn sister and brother, were able to write music at a very early age and very competent. At age 14, Mendelssohn was able to write his first masterpiece, the B minor piano quartet, while Mozart had to struggle, the way we said. Let's go back to Mozart. So he had met this man, Gottfried van Swieten, and started attending at the concerts. So he learned Bach music, which was, he had, as we said, he had met one son of his. Johann Sebastian Bach had some 21 between sons and daughters. Can you imagine? And hello, Rosanna Monda. Thank you for joining us. And what happened was that Mozart started thinking music in a completely different way. At this point, what was the turning point? We are talking about Luca Bianchini and Dana Trombetta, but also other musicologists in the past had sensed that there were at least two Mozarts. The one who had to find his way, basically struggling on the battlefield, as I said, and another Mozart, the Mozart who became the Mozart of the big works, after meeting Johann Sebastian Bach music. We can see that in 1785, Mozart wrote a big fantasy and piano sonata, which was inspired by Johann Sebastian Bach's musical offering, the Musikalische Opfer. So this can be considered the turning point, which made Mozart the the great composer we know. Also, his career progressed because he, thanks to this new Freemason contacts, finally he succeeded in entering, in starting a career as an opera composer. But as an Italian third-rate musicologist who this man, I won't mention him because doesn't deserve to, but had once he said something really right. Had Mozart found his way earlier, we now would have 4 or 5 more operas and will miss 14 piano concertos. So, as a pianist, I'm happy that things work like this. So, in any event, he started finally having success as an opera composer. In 1787, his opera Don Giovanni, Don Juan, which was the story of the famous Latin lover, was who had conquered thousands of women, and finally was taken to hell. This story was performed in Prague in 1787, was performed in Vienna too. So his career started. So in those years, he could have performance of other operas like Clemenza di Tito and Così fan tutte, and also an opera in German, the so-called Singspiel, by name the Zauberflöte. He had also written other operas, and which were performed too. And Zauberflöte is a fable, which is supposed to have Freemason symbols, but many music like this, a lot of fables like this were written by different people and were quite common. So even this Bianchini e Trombetta, I think was not really related to Freemasonry, even if some symbols are present also in the Freemason ceremonies, etc., etc. In any event, Mozart was starting finally having a career, even if he had the bad habit of spending all his money. He was not exactly the kind of man he liked to live peacefully. So, and he was producing a lot anyway, but in the meantime was spending time having affairs with other women in spite of being married and having kids. But the big problem was that his health was not that great. He had most likely, according to an Australian doctor by name John O'Shea, who has written a very interesting book on the causes of death of many composers. And according to this man, he had kidneys problem. Nevertheless, he was having affairs with numerous women, and among them, this was the most the most problematic thing, he had affairs with the wives of some Freemason brothers. So he was punished, and always according to Bianchini e Trombetta, one day some brothers waited for him and and uh, and attacked him and beated him. This was most likely, according to Bianchini e Trombetta, the reason why his health collapsed, and so together with his kidney problem, uh, brought him to premature death at the end of 1791. He was trying to write, that time, December 1791, he was trying to write a requiem. He was commissioned by a person, we don't know who, according to Mozart himself, a man who was wearing a black mantle, approached him and offered him a big amount of money for writing a requiem. So Mozart started writing this, but fell ill and was trying to finish the requiem. Also, on his deathbed, he was trying to dictate something to his assistants, but didn't succeed. So the requiem was completed by a student of his. Actually, we don't know how much he completed, how much this man, Swiss Meyer, will had to write himself. Of course, he could imagine what Mozart wanted, but was not exactly Mozart himself to write. So, in any event, the Requiem was published and performed after Mozart's death in 1 year later. Mozart, because of this, died poor and leaving a wife with 2 kids. The second one born that very year 1791. So basically, the kid never met his father. The older one, Carl Thomas, became a public servant and worked in Milano for the Austrian government and lived most of his life in Italy. Frank Xavier studied music, became a composer himself, even if his career was not as important as his father's. Now we have, let's aside what was attributed, we have very important works left. And Mozart was buried in a common grave because nobody could afford a monument for him. His widow, Constance, remarried and with a man by name Nissen, and they tried to monetize Mozart's inheritance. Nissen wrote also a biography in which reported all the anecdotes that now are the basis of usual history of music. And difficult to say what was written to make an hagiography of Mozart and what was really true. Mozart was a very controversial man anyway. Let's aside what both sides write about him. Was a very controversial man, had a very difficult life, very twisted life. So we don't know exactly what he did and what he didn't do. What he did for sure was quite important because Mozart became the link between Bach and Beethoven. Beethoven, who was himself linked to the Bavarian Illuminati we talked about, visited Vienna in 1787 for his first time before moving definitely there in years later. And of course, the first visit he paid was to Mozart, who heard him and said that and predicting a very important future for this young boy. And Beethoven was supposed to go back Vienna to study with Mozart, but Mozart died, so he studied with another important person by name Franz Joseph Haydn, who was another important composer and was a friend of Mozart, even if older, and eventually studied with other people. So we have, and therefore, Mozart was considered in inner circles to be very important. Even if Beethoven didn't study with Mozart, he was devoted to Mozart, and while he played his first concert in Vienna in 1795, he chose to perform a Mozart piano concerto D minor. Later, he wrote also the fermatas, decadenzas for this concerto. So Mozart was still considered to be a genius. Mozart never disappeared from the standard repertoire, as happened to Bach, for instance. But the problem was that at the time there was no copyright, so there was no way to get royalties out of performances. So he was famous, he became more famous, but this was not bringing money. So they created this industry selling, and this would explain why new pieces of Mozart appeared suddenly and were sold as Mozart on music. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart became a label, and we don't know exactly who wrote some music. Even recently, we hear that the new manuscript is attributed to Mozart, but how they can say, it's very difficult to say. I am not a musicologist, and I don't want to start discussing this, but I cannot avoid to report what this kind of doubt about this thing. Repeat, Mozart was anyway a very talented, was a genius, was a super musician. We have, there are, on my YouTube channel, you can listen to some of his music. And on my YouTube channels, we have 2 piano concertos, which were part of the concertos he wrote instead of writing operas. So one of the famous 14 concerts we would not have in case. And we have performances with my friend and collaborator, Giorgio Rodolfo Marini, a great conductor, who is working with me consistently, and there are two concertos of the early period, Viennese period, and a very important fugue. He wrote a fantasy fugue, which was the first thing which was going to imitate, to shows that Mozart was trying to reach the Bachian writing even before meeting Van Swieten, and the fantasy and fugue K394 you can find on my YouTube channel. I was captured by the idea of this idea of making music. Forgive me, I want to show you something. I forgot to take with me in. Let me see what I can find. I can find. No, how come it's not here? Too bad. No, I don't have it here. I was looking for. Oh, how come? Too bad. No, it's not here. I don't know where it is. Doesn't matter. I had mentioned that that Mozart in 1785 had written a fantasy and fugue in C minor, which was inspired by Bach musical offering. So this idea captured an American producer who wanted me to perform, to record an LP that was happening before the CD era. And so I recorded the musical offering, the first piece of the musical offering, the fantasy and sonata in Mozart, and the direct consequence, which was the Beethoven sonata, who was inspired by the Mozart fantasy and sonata. So I was involved in this idea of, which was called the Musical Masters in Dialogue. This idea was developed 7 years later in a series of concerts I gave in the United States, in Virginia, and where I played an extended version of this. I played again the 3 pieces plus other pieces related for a total, I forget, were 4 or 5 concerts. I gave also some conferences about this idea of music, and so I could follow the idea of that music follows its own history, and some music were part of it. And Mozart was an important part of it. In that occasion of this extended concert, I played also this fantasy and fugue I have just mentioned, and actually the recording I have on my YouTube channel comes from this is a live recording coming from this 1987 series of concerts. What shall I say again? Mozart. I think I have spoken too much about Mozart, but the most important thing is to listen to his music, to appreciate his capacity and the way he finally mastered this music, and of course, I I'll be glad if you could appreciate his own music, and and to to become friend of his music and the music he inspired, and made people people write. I'll tell you more. We talk about Beethoven. Of course, he was inspired by Mozart. He had visited Mozart. He was supposed to study with Mozart, but not only Beethoven. Friedrich Chopin considered himself son of Mozart, of Bach and Mozart, and in fact, he was terribly in debt to him, and actually, Chopin, as a pianist, didn't play anything else but his music, with one only exception in his concert life. The only exception was a composition by Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Of course, when Mozart remained in the standard repertoire, especially when at the time most of pianists were also composers and were performing their own music. But at a certain point, when pianists become specialized and stop writing their own music, and were pianists playing as we are now, most of us, we were playing somebody else's music. So Mozart remained in the standard repertoire, and it's still performed a lot. I think that, of course, let aside all we said about the music was attributed to him, maybe not maybe not his own music, but what we know for sure to be his own music really deserves to be heard and really deserves to be appreciated. So I urge all of you to look at Mozart music, not only on my YouTube channel, but also on somebody else's. There are a lot of compositions by Mozart. I recommend not to listen to early Mozart music, which might not be his own, but the big works of his maturity, and I wouldn't say late, because Mozart never became old. At the time, actually, life was much shorter. Mozart died at age 35. Chopin died at age 39. Schubert at age 31. And Mendelssohn, we talked about, died at age 38. So, because mortality was very high, and also doctors were not that good, and the quality of life, even for rich people like Mendelssohn, was not exactly the best, was not that healthy. So we have this many people never became old according to our standard. Beethoven, who died relatively old, died at age 56. So and so we cannot we cannot say that that was really such an age, to our standard, of course. And this is the story. So it's almost time to finish our live, and I'd like to thank you, all people who joined us, and
We still have 6 million viewers.
yeah, and who joined us and appreciated my this this speech on this big composer. I hope I'll have time to talk about music again. Unfortunately, I am not specialized in talking about music. I prefer to play it, and of course, I have to practice and to prepare concerts and do things. But of course, I understand that this is very important, and I do my best to share
My knowledge.
my knowledge, actually, to share music. I am not sharing any knowledge. I am sharing my passion for music, and trying to make people appreciate. This is the aim that I followed during my years of teaching, and of course in my years of playing around the world, and hope that this
But
pandemic.
normal, then you can go around the world.
Well, we can go around the world as soon as restrictions are over. Now we are in a certain, we have certain limitations. We have planned concerts, but we don't know whether these concerts are going to take place. And but I hope that this story is going to go to an end soon, and I hope to be able to resume a regular concert activity. Once again, it's almost time to say goodbye and good night to the Philippine friends, and I hope to see you again in the future. And once again, I invite everybody to subscribe to this channel and to attend it, not only and to listen to the music which you can find. And and thank you for being with us, and for appreciating music, and invite you to listen to good music, not only to the music in this YouTube channel. You can find a lot of good music. YouTube is a big platform, and you can find, and not only that, you can find on other platforms like Spotify, Deezer, Amazon Music. So you can listen to other composers, and to other good music by many. There are many good musicians all over the world, and I I hope this helps in making you appreciate classical music, which is very important. Um, in what else? I think we are now going to an end soon. In a few minutes, we have to go back to the Philippine friends are going to sleep, and we are going back to our regular activity. And I hope you have appreciated this big, this small speak about Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, and I will take other advantage for talking about other composers, other musicians, other important people made our music and our life better. Once again, thank you for being with us, and hope to see you again in the very next future. Don't forget to tell your friends to subscribe to this channel. We are already a good number, but better more than less. And hope you enjoyed our conversation. And if somebody has any question before we go,
About the question. How many women he had?
oh, how many women Mozart had? We don't know. We know that his sex life started very early.
Oh, sex life.
Yeah, he had
How late?
before marrying Constance von Weber, he had already had sex with many women. We know that we think that in the 18th century, women were very, very shy. Not true. The other way around. Were terrible, especially in the German area, and they liked. And
They like sex then.
yeah, and they had no problem in having sex if they liked the man.
How
So
many kids he had?
Mozart have at the time Mozart had various kids, but because of the the health situation, only two survived. But this was quite common even in rich families. Many kids were dying in the very first months or years of life. And so, in any event, Mozart had two, let's say, official kids from his marriage survived. One was Carl Thomas, who, as I said, became worked for the government and spent most of his life in Italy, serving the Austrian government. And the other, who was born the year of Mozart's death, 1791, lived until 1844, Franz Xavier, and was a musician too. And but was not as talented as the father. So it's time to go. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and looking forward to see you soon again. Bye, my friends, and have a good afternoon. Have a good night.
Good night, everyone. Thank you, everyone. Akali friends, hindi kami, of course, especially there. And tayong kaibigan, thank you sa kaming mga Rosana, Berna. Okay, thank you. Lahat na nandiyan, thank you so much.
Okay, bye. Bye now.